G'day folks, and welcome to this review of Pendragon, The Fall of Roman Britain. This is volume 8 in GMT's and Volker Runke's coin series, and it was designed by Morgane, Gouyon-Rety. This is, I think there's a consensus in my group that this is the most thematically immersive of the coin games that we have played. Bearing in mind we haven't played Cuba Libre and we haven't played the recently released Gandhi, volume 9 in the series. At the same time, it is, I would argue, the most complex of the coin games that we have played in this series. There are a lot of additional rules on top of the sort of regular coin system to make this a strategically deeper coin game compared to those other games in the series. This certainly adds that extra layer of strategic consideration to your actions. It also correspondingly makes it a little bit more difficult for new players to grasp. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. For those of you who haven't played a coin game, gameplay begins by drawing an event card from the top, and we work through the order of eligibility. Each of these little icons corresponds to one of the 4 players in the game. Pendragon is a 1 to 4 player game. We've only played it 4 player. I haven't played it with the bots. We haven't played it with less than 4, so I can't comment on solitaire suitability or sort of 2 or 3 player games. Certainly as a 4 player game, you will follow the order of eligibility. In this case, the Britons Civitates will have first option. When you have the option to be eligible, the player can perform a command action, they can perform the event, they work through their sequence of play, and then the next person in the order of eligibility can choose to follow. They have typically a slightly reduced series of options available. It might be a limited command. I won't go into detail on what that means. And then those 2 factions that perform actions become ineligible for the next card, and the remaining 2 factions are eligible. So if the Civitates and the Scotti were active on this card, they then become ineligible here, and on the next card out, it'd be the Red Ducks versus the Black Scotti. Now there are 4 factions in this game, as I've been mentioning. There are the Ducks, the old Romans, seeking to, I guess, arrest the decline of Roman rule in Britain. You have the Civitates, who are kind of the successors of the Romans. Then you have the kind of insurgency, the Saxons, coming on the east coast of Britain, looking to establish a homeland in Britain. And the Scotti are coming from the north and the west, looking to do the same thing. So you have the kind of the powerful elites with their troops. The Ducks have their cavalry, very powerful. Then you have the kind of the guerrillas, in a sense, with their weaker forces, starting off in a relatively weak position, typically. You do, of course, have various campaigns. You can play through the full campaign and follow the decline of Roman power in Britain, or you can play more established campaigns where, for example, the Scotti and the Saxons have sort of a starting stronghold in Britain, and it's more of a level playing field. I mentioned the additional rules. Now, if you're familiar with the coin system, it's that basic card play, but terrain is far more important and creates more difficult tactical and strategic considerations, in that largely revolving around the combat system when it comes to battles. This is the combat system is probably the one element of Pendragon that is potentially divisive, and it certainly sort of divided my group in terms of how we feel about it. It is far more complex, and I'd argue the most complex battle system out of the coin titles we've played, because there are various decision points and variabilities that shape the outcome of combat. In other coin titles, combat can be as simple as, for every troop in the space, remove 1 enemy force. In Pendragon, there are options throughout. If you have raiders, they can potentially evade combat, or they can potentially ambush the attackers. If you have warbands, federati, comitates, they do the same thing, but after the raiders. Then there may be a trap the defenders have the option to withdraw. There may be a charge or ambush with the cavalry or ambushing troops. Then there's a regular melee segment, and then the harassing segment after that. You then, if there are fortifications in the stronghold, in the area, fortifications, there may be an assault phase where the attackers try to perhaps assault that fortification, the stronghold, or lay siege to it. And again, there are different options here. All these considerations vary depending on the terrain that that battle is being fought in. And we have found in our games that players will often work through as many of these calculations as they can. So, there are two things here. First of all, there's a lot of consideration taking place based on terrain, based on the quality of troops, based on the combination of troops, based on what type of stronghold is in that terrain. These factors all shape the battles in subtly different ways and give the defender various options to ambush, withdraw, and so forth. At the same time, the downside of this is that it slows down gameplay quite a lot. Sometimes players will spend 5, 10, 15 minutes going through these calculations, going through this battle sequence to determine kind of their odds of succeeding. It's not just a case of, oh, attack here, remove your troops. It's a case of, okay, well, if I attack here, you may be able to evade. You've got a 50% chance of doing that. Or you can ambush me. What type of terrain is it? Yep. What type of troops do you have? Those guys. What's their role for evasion? Even after, as I said, this is the coin game that we have played the most, certainly in recent months. It's still taking us time to work through these considerations. And all of that slows down gameplay considerably, thus making Pendragon perhaps the slowest of the coin games to play through, despite the fact, as I said, that we have played it the most. It remains the slowest game for us to work through. Having said that, we also played a very quick game of about 36 minutes the other week for various reasons which I won't go into. You also have the Imperium track, which is an addition which traces the decline of Roman rule in Britain. And this also changes the victory conditions that players are striving towards. So, for example, I've played a lot of the Saxons in Pendragon. And in the campaign game, they start off by seeking to gain renown, and they can win by reaching a certain renown level. Once the Imperium track declines to fragmentation, the Saxons can no longer achieve a renown victory. They have to win by controlling population across various areas. And if you're caught off guard, you may be striving for one victory condition, and then suddenly the Imperium track changes, and that's no longer an eligible route to victory. That can be quite complex as well. The different strongholds that are in play and their different effects on combat in terms of, I won't go into too much detail, but basically they contribute different defense, they can garrison units, they have a different holding capacity. These seemingly small factors really take some time to work through, and it can be a bit to get your head around your chances for success by looking at a space. This is different to, as I said, other coin games where you can often look directly at a space and know immediately whether or not you can win combat. This, as I said, can take several minutes to figure out whether or not combat is a good idea or not. There are, of course, different types of units. You've got your cavalry, your militia, comitates, your raiders and warbands. That's not too difficult. That's pretty common in coin games. It's when these things are factored into, when you combine these different types of units with the different types of terrain, with the different options to withdraw or ambush, with those different types of strongholds and their effects on combat. That's really the core of the complexity in Pendragon. As I said earlier though, all of this adds to the strategic considerations that you're making. You are, for example, as a Saxon player, I generally want to avoid clear terrain because I don't get those defensive advantages. I can't evade, I can't ambush as easily. I will generally, as a Saxon player, be more vulnerable to ducks and comitates counterattacks in those clear terrains. At the same time, at some point, I might need to expand into that clear terrain. So I'm thinking carefully about how I can minimize the damage that my opponents can do to me. Now I won't go through the various actions that are available. Basically they're divided into commands and feats. And each power has 4 different commands, 4 different feats. Again, these are pretty standard for a coin title. Things like building new troops, moving your troops around, and waging warfare. With a few sort of special moves in there. The feats are also pretty similar. The Saxons and the Scotti are looking to settle, build new homes, gain renown, basically resources and wealth for themselves. The Ducks are trying to destroy their opponents. The Civitates are trying to destroy their opponents whilst also sort of building power and renown or wealth for themselves. There are a few other little rules quirks that add to this thematic immersion. There are, for example, Federati troops, basically barbarian warbands, can be almost captured or purchased by the Britons, by the Ducks and the Civitates, and they basically get taken over. The key problem for the barbarians here is that this takes troops out of their supply pool and adds to the Ducks and the Civitates pool at the expense of those barbarian factions. There are also these prosperity cubes, these gold cubes that begin spread throughout the locations on the board, and these can be plundered by the barbarians, which can add to their renown if they can be returned home. Each area, of course, has a population, and that can be changed and modified, and that affects control. There's, of course, a road network that the Ducks can use to move their troops, and there are sea zones which can be sort of patrolled or non-patrolled, and that affects this barbarian movement and raiding throughout Britain. So as I said, it has become our most played coin title of late because it creates a fascinating story. The extra rules complexity is a bit divisive. It can be a little bit frustrating at times, the delay in working through that battle sequence. It's not my personal preference, but as I said, my group loves this. They love the story. They love the thematic immersion. If I were to recommend this, I would recommend it for experienced coin players. I would not necessarily recommend this as your first coin game. I'd recommend you move to something a little bit easier before moving on to Pendragon. Because of that extra, mainly the extra battle sequence, the extra complexity with terrain, troop types, and the Imperium track. Aside from that though, it's the core coin system at heart as the foundation. And as I said, those experienced players shouldn't struggle too much to make the adjustment to Pendragon.